Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin, the SEO of Inwood, New York City, and thanks for joining me today. And this video will be about replacing username and password. This form was never really wired up, and my first thought was to make this pickle the username, your Google login credentials onto the hard drive to replace that manual thing you had to do through the interactive command line for Python previously, but then it occurred to me it's time to do OAuth2, and not just OAuth2 to avoid usernames and passwords. OAuth2 was something called implicit grant mode, so that I don't even need this additional requirement of OAuth2 called the client secret to get embedded into the pipulate code, because that would be bad. And I've talked about those issues in prior videos, so let's jump in, although do expect a lot of pausing on this video because I am in somewhat unexplored territory. And the process starts on the GitHub documentation at the bottom. If you just search on GSpread, choose the first one. That's the GSpread project in GitHub, and it says alternate authorization using OAuth2. So right off the bat, we know we're going to be needing to do OAuth2 so that we can do something similar to this, although this, we've got to research it a little bit more, and we find that they're suggesting you use Google's OAuth2 libraries, but if you have another way of doing OAuth2 login, you can easily hack a custom credentials object. So I will be replacing the area in the code where currently I am loading something off of the hard drive. Let's see. Yeah, this is it. This is where we create a dictionary that has the username and password values for use later on. Opening something by URL and being logged in essentially from a file on the hard drive named this that we need to get out of the picture. Replacing it with something like this. So where does that bring us? Well, you can see the way you call the credentials object. Let's see. We create an object with an incidence of credentials, and all we need to do is feed that an object that has a property, the value of which is access token. So once we acquire access token, we can plug it in as the property of an instance of a credentials object, and then feed that in for a login. There's an instance of the credentials object. It has the token embedded into it through object-oriented property method, and that will take the place of the login. OAuth2 is kind of weird, but we're going to sort of work our way through it. So how do I get this token? There is a couple of ways, and one of them is just knowing how to manually construct a URL. I could actually go and I could make a URL here that would pop up an OAuth window, force me to use my credentials if they weren't already there, which they are because you can already see I'm logged into Google, and just hit OK and give it the permissions it's asking for. But that kind of manually doing stuff is simplified when you merely use a client library. And because it's OAuth2 and we're using Flask, there is available something called Flask-OAuth-lib, which supports up to OAuth2. We're on the installation page, but if I went back one, you would see one of the big things is that it supports OAuth2, which we have to use. So we can't use just Flask-OAuth, which is such a thing, but it only has OAuth1 support. And so now what we want to do is install this client library. on our server, which is going to make it one of the requirements. So I jump back to the top of this document, find pip install, and then do O, and then do an operating system paste, document its necessity first. Hope this works out because I'm documenting that it's required. And operating system paste, oh, failed login. I keep losing my sessions. I'm going to have to investigate that. Pause, unpause, and we'll try that again. Paste. We are installing something that will help us code the acquisition of an authentication token much more easily. Downloading and unpacking. Looking good. I hate throwing in one more dependency, but it's really worth it. OAuth2 is a complicated thing, and when you're trying to do something on a platform like Flask, on Python, on a Raspberry Pi, or any other Linux server, you're looking for support tools that are the perfect Venn diagram for you. Successfully installed. And so our next step is to pause while I pull up an example of an OAuth2 Flask login. Okay, I think this is going to be some really special kung fu here. I'm going to manually construct the URL with what I know, using these as parameters and setting them to the values required that I know from my research so far. Okay, the trick first is to just construct a login URL, and I found this OAuth2 Playground for Google, and it tells you the scope. Step 1, select the scope. That is my scope, where you can input your own, but I found it. Authorize APIs. Oh, look at that. This is what I'm looking for. Copy. And let's see. Pause. Capturing that URL is the perfect thing to get me starting my work journal for, let's see, October 31st, Halloween. It's a Friday. And that is, oh, I always put the year, 2014, and a hyphen for that. Or no, just a space for that, and then a hyphen for the topic. OAuth2 coding. That becomes the title, so that I can tell at a glance what I did that day. I put it in title and center it, which is strangely hidden under more, but I guess it makes sense. And now I lost what I copied. I just run back here, copy, paste, and that's a lot to look at. That's probably stuff I shouldn't even be letting you see right now. Let me pause it for a moment. This is the ugly offending parameter, so I will eliminate it. And it's a bummer it starts to hyperlink this stuff. I really don't want it to appear hyperlinked. But what we're doing now is we are identifying each ampersand, which is a different parameter, and we're knocking it onto a separate line, not trying to introduce new mistakes while we do it. And this is really interesting because this continue is actually a full URL embedded in there that you actually have to look kind of carefully to know how to get to the next genuine parameter after that, the first non-encoded ampersand. And this is not really looking like a a login to me. This looks like a pre-login that goes through a redirect. But this looks like the one that we really need. And I copy that. And I go to, I search on URL decode. And we'll find a web example. And you paste it in and you hit decode. And this looks a lot more like the OAuth2 login URL than what I was just playing with. So I go back to my journal, wipe this entire thing out. I don't think there's anything there I need. Paste the new one in, and this has the kind of parameters that we know we should be expecting from the documentation that we were looking at somewhere. What was that? Yeah, it was here for a grant, for an implicit grant response. Oh, that's the response. For an implicit grant request, which is what we're building, we're going to need these parameters: response type, client ID, redirect URI, scope, and state. And you'll notice scope, response type, access type, redirect URI, looking familiar, huh? Approval prompt, client ID, which is not a secret, that is allowed to be broadcast, language, from login, and there are our parameters. And we know that if we build a URL like this, it will prompt a OAuth2 login request. We want proof, Option Shift New. Here is a incognito window. I paste that URL, I hit enter, bam, sign in with your Google account. If I actually were to do that, I'd have to go through two-stage authentication here, yeah, let's do it. I'll use Mike 11 SEO, and it has my password stored. I hit sign in. Now I'm going to get a message sent to me on my phone. Oops. I'm dropping things left and right. Going to my phone, I see the code sent to me. I go into it. And let's just see this thing to completion, because this is important to understand OAuth. And it's okay to let you see that, because these are one-offs. Those are burnable. And here you have it. I'm going to store this for posterity's sake in that journal I was working on. Where is that? I guess that's on this side here. Nice to know. And after I accept it, we should see one of these things being an actual, oh, it's code. Very interesting. I was expecting the authentication token here. Well, I'm going to hold this where it says code equals. This is a different kind of authentication where you never have the authentication token on the web browser. It's better for preventing man-in-the-middle attacks, and I was a little bit surprised that the Playground was made to work that way, because there's one more step: exchange authorization code for tokens. Let's see what that does. There you go. We're now sitting on top of one of those tokens, and let's see. There's a refresh token. There's the access token. It's a bearer token type. There's where it expires, and a refresh token to keep it alive. This is probably highly hackable, but it will all have expired by the time you're seeing this video. And I need to look through things like how to change that request to implicit, and it wasn't. It was the other type, and that's on me now. So I go back to here, and then I take this stuff here. I guess I paste it down there, and I'm going to use the actual values required. So spreadsheet.googles.com, response type. See, that's code, but our documentation says response type must be set to token. See what's happening here? I'm going to change this so it's entirely clear. Response type, no, that's access type. It needs to be token. Response type. Oh no, I was right the first time. Access type. Not required. Redirect, we'll keep it to that for now. Approval prompt, not required. Client ID required, I'll change it to mine. Redirect URI, we talked about. Scope and state. None of those are required. This is our redirect URL. Scope and state. State required, optional. Recommended, any client state that needs to be paid. Oh, it's just keeping a client state. So scoped, redirect client, and response type. Scope, redirect, client, and response type. Okay, so we have it partly built here. I'm going to go get my client ID. I pause. And to get my client ID, I go into the Google Developers Console and I go into Credentials under APIs and Auth. And I'll copy that now. And then I'll paste it here in place of this other guy's client ID. And now I will copy and paste this one more time because it's starting to look like something we can work with. Now the precursor to it is, let's see how that works. Yeah, this is the precursor. This is actually important right here. And so when we're constructing a URL to do the kind of authorization we need, it is this appended into one line, like this. I need to construct this URL in my application so that when I go to an anonymous browsing window, we don't need the playground anymore. I've got that bookmarked for later use. Option Shift New for a new, what do you call it, incognito window. Paste that in. We go through authentication again, although it did seem to step on top of my stuff. I do want to take sure, yeah, it still says it's asking for token and it's got the right scope. It changed the URL automatically, so I'm going to copy that and drop that into my journal so that I can take a look at how it fixed it. I did what I thought it was. Oh, it put in that big chunk of stuff again. Okay. And this is going to be that again and this again, and I'm going to have to do the two-step authentication again, but I'm sitting here watching. 150 OAuth2. And now we look at this. Oh, 400, that's fine. URL mismatch. And redirect request must match. It did not match a registered. The redirect request did not match. That's interesting. Okay. The redirect URL, I think I neglected to change here. I'm going to make it one of the approved ones, which was localhost 8080 without S protocol. Now it's not going to exactly work unless I start hosting this project on my Mac here instead of my Raspberry Pi, which is a real possibility because I think stopping and starting the server will be considerably faster. Hey, Pipulate would like to have offline access. Oh, I'll have to check that. I didn't realize I was asking for offline access. But if that gives offline access and a token, all we have to do is change the scope in order to make sure that we have the right, let's see, yeah, scope. Did I include the scope here? Spreadsheets. Okay, not sure exactly why it's asking for offline access, but let's accept. And there you have it, localhost 8080 with an access token given after a hash mark, mind you. This is very important on how we're going to implement the rest of the way. But so much was accomplished here in this video, and I'm going to stop. OAuth2 Implicit Grant scenario is going to have to be broken up into multiple videos because it's very tricky to get all the pieces to come together. But this got a lot of them to come together, especially in the sense that we could build a URL that results in giving you the authentication token here. And I'm going to copy that and paste that into my journal. I'll have to label these things to keep track of what's what, but that's a big breakthrough, and not sure everyone following this video can see why that's a breakthrough, but because it says access token here, trust me, this is exactly what we want to set the stage for the next step, where, well, exposed you to the publishing of the last video, where we go way back to this, which I started showing you this morning, in which we can feed the access token in as the parameter value of a credentials object, and then we can use that credentials object to authorize our access to Google Spreadsheets for GSpread. And we can avoid usernames, passwords, and even embedding the client secret anywhere in this whole picture, which is the perfect way to implement OAuth2 in a free and open source project where this could end up installed anywhere, localhost Raspberry Pis, and you can't go moving around code that has credentials that don't expire embedded into the thing, including a client secret. And you can't demand that setting this up be real difficult either for people who want to try it out. So thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you soon, and don't forget to subscribe.